All right, Councilmember Allen is in the process of joining. We're currently live on YouTube. And I will go ahead and give me 1 second. All right, Councilmember, you can begin when you're ready.
Good morning. I'm Robert White, Council Member at Large and Chair of the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities. Today is Wednesday, October 20th, 2021, and the time is now 11:07 a.m. And I'm calling to order this hearing of the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities regarding B24-200, the Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021, and the path to universal high-speed internet service. Councilmember Allen, with the support of myself, Chairman Mendelson, and council members Nadeau, Che, Henderson, Silverman, Gray, Lewis, George, and Pinto, introduced the Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021 on April 1st, 2021. I'm grateful to Councilmember Allen for putting forward this important legislation. I hope today's hearing will include a robust conversation about that proposal, while also providing an opportunity to share other ideas on how we can chart a path toward universal, affordable, high-speed internet for all district residents. Once considered a luxury, a fast internet connection is now undeniably a necessity. Over the last year and a half, we've witnessed just how important the internet is for our students to learn and our residents to work. The internet also keeps us connected to our loved ones when we can't see them in person. What we have also witnessed over the last year and a half, however, is that the inequity that divides our city is reflected in our disparate access to the internet. Children who live in households with low incomes often lack access to a high-speed internet connection, and as a result, have academic difficulties that are both avoidable and potentially devastating. But it's not just households with school-age children that need affordable internet connection. Most households need it now. Households without adequate access to the internet have higher hurdles to searching for a job and severe difficulty participating in online course or training programs or access to healthcare services. The Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021 would create a new digital equity division in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, led by the Director of Digital Equity, tasked with developing minimum standards for upload and download speeds, and coordinating with other district agencies to ensure equitable access to district government services offered through online platforms. Specifically, these recommended minimum upload and download speeds must be adequate for district residents to work from home and engage in distance learning. For students in pre-K through 12th grade, this reflects the needs of modern times. Our world has changed. In order to make sure all households have access to affordable high-speed internet, we have to first understand residents' concerns and current experiences with their internet service. In our most recent FY22 committee report, I recommended that OCTO conduct a public survey of district residents about their internet connection experiences before and during COVID-19, including questions about whether they have an in-home internet solution, the affordability of that service, and service provider availability at their home address. The reporting requirements in this legislation would mandate a similar survey and will require swift action on the part of OCTO upon enactment. Within 90 days of enactment, OCTO would need to deliver a report to the council that identifies all district agency applications for services or benefits that are not accessible across commonly used devices such as desktop, laptop, tablet, or smartphone, and across the most popular internet browsers. The report would also include the number and percent of district households that do not have a connection at the recommended connection speed, and for households earning 50% of the median family income or less, the number and percent of households that are paying more than 0.5% of household income for internet connection. Within 180 days, OCTO would need to ensure that all district households identified in the prior surveys are connected to the internet at the recommended connection speed and at a cost that does not exceed 0.5% of household income. Finally, within 1 year of the effective date, OCTO must present to the council a master internet plan that includes, among other things, a description of public assets, infrastructure improvements, and technologies needed to ensure all district residents are connected at the recommended speeds, and plans for public engagement by district agencies and community organizations to overcome barriers to internet adoption. We all need internet access to function successfully in our web-dependent society, particularly true during the pandemic, but certainly as we move forward, the internet is essential to accessing jobs, critical healthcare services, virtual classrooms, groceries, and other deliveries. I'm looking forward to a robust discussion today about how we can meet these needs for all of our residents. With that, let me turn it over to my colleague, who is not a member of this committee, but the author of the bill we're discussing today, Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I'm not a member of the committee, but thanks for letting me come hang out with you and our witnesses today to really talk about this important piece. And I also want to express my gratitude to so many colleagues that put their name on this effort and this piece of legislation, recognizing how important it is. Obviously, throughout the course of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of inequities in our city exposed, exacerbated, and I got to say that digital divide's got to be near the top of that list. Now, for me and for many other people in the district, transitioning to virtual work and school was certainly inconvenient, but it was also certainly doable. I, like a lot of people, decided to shell out a little bit more every month for a faster internet speed. A house full of people working and going to school online was not always fun, but our internet connection was rarely. For many in the district, of course, it's just not that easy. And it's no surprise that those without easy access to reliable high-speed internet tend to be Black and Latino and tend to live in the eastern half of the district. In some cases, fast internet is available, but it's either out of a family's budget or a cost burden that prevents them from spending money on other necessities. But for some in the district, they just couldn't connect to the highest speed internet, even if they wanted to. I mean, we've even seen some of our own colleagues on the council struggle to keep a reliable connection in some instances. And I'm not just talking about if you're muted or not. We've watched our colleagues drop out of meetings or have difficulty connecting, even when they're in the Wilson building. Now, many of us expect that even after this pandemic winds down, more and more employment opportunities will remain at least partly virtual, as employers and employees see the benefits of adding in some telework and virtual work. If we can't ensure that all neighborhoods have high quality internet infrastructure, then we, plain and simple, are leaving in place barriers to employment. So what can we do about it? I know that Octo has done work in this area, but we need to move with much more urgency, and that's what I think this legislation would do. First, it would ask Octo to identify the internet speed that district residents need to have access to. And just to be clear, this would not impose any direct obligation on internet service providers. Federal regulations are going to preempt the district's ability to regulate in many areas of telecommunications, but this recommended internet speed would be simply a publicly known baseline for what we, as a district government, need to provide our residents. I believe we're going to hear some testimony today saying that we can't take that FCC regulations preempt the district from regulating it all in this area. This just isn't correct. While we can't regulate ISPs, we can certainly set out a goal for what our own programs will do. Then the bill sets out a work plan for Octo. Octo will have to identify what the internet access needs are and then make that available to the council and the public. Then Octo will set out a plan to get everyone connected to fast, reliable internet. That's it. Gives Octo lots of discretion to use their expertise to design that plan, but that plan has to happen. Lots of other cities are doing this, and I know this is something that the staff and leadership at Octo want to do, so let's work together. One important part of this plan that I want to highlight is also that it would require Octo to work with other agencies to ensure that every agency's online processes and applications are accessible on all platforms. Many residents without reliable internet connections at home, they're using their smartphones as their main connection to the internet. But we learned the hard way during the pandemic that unemployment insurance applications, for example, just really can't be done on the phone. We need to fix that, and we need to be proactive, looking at every agency before we discover the problems in an emergency. And then finally, the bill would create a director of digital equity for the district to lead this planning and implementation effort along with the chief technology officer. I know some of our witnesses today have thoughts about what else that director can do, and I look forward to that hearing. If I can make one final point, Mr. Chairman, if you'll permit me, I've spent hours between last night in a community meeting, this morning in meetings with public safety officials focused on a spike in violent crime that we're enduring in our city over the past days and months and last year. And here's the thing. If we look at that map overlaid where crime is taking place and where internet connectivity is worst, it's often the same places. The point in that is not that having internet makes you or a community somehow less or more likely to experience crime. That's obviously not true. The point I want to make is this. The more that someone is shut out of opportunity, or the more that households fall behind in an increasingly online world with the chance to provide for themselves and their family, the more likely that person then can only find bad options as the only option. It's taking steps like this that will help us actually address root causes that often have the same thing in common: hopelessness, cynicism, that there's a future for you. I could take that same map with plenty of examples, right? I could overlay with access to food, proximity to transit, access to quality healthcare, educational outcomes. We talk often about equity and righting historic wrongs and underinvestments. And I think this can be what that looks like in practice. We need to be throwing our residents that strong lifeline, ensuring they can apply for jobs, be a part of the workforce, be a part of the future of our workforce, access the government resources that are meant to help. None of that happens if you can't even get online in the first place. So as you said, Mr. Chairman, high-speed internet, it's not a luxury anymore. The pandemic has drastically sped the shift of our lives online. If we want to ensure that all of our residents can keep up, we've got to examine our infrastructure now. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I have to chair a transportation planning board meeting where we'll also be talking about transportation equity starting at noon. So I won't be able to be here for the whole hearing, but I do plan to pop in and out. My staff will be here throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. And I want to welcome Councilmember Pinto, who is a member of this committee. Councilmember Pinto, if you have an opening statement, we would welcome it now.
Great, thank you so much, Chairman White, for holding this important hearing on internet equity. And thank you, Councilmember Allen, for your leadership in introducing this important bill. Internet equity, I agree, is a prerequisite for individuals and communities to have the information technology needed for full participation in our society, economy, and democracy. And our internet equity is essential for employment, civic and cultural participation, education, and access to essential district services. The basis for the lack of internet equity in the district is found in decades of socioeconomic inequities. Students in schools in the wealthier parts of our city have been able to afford more technology, faster internet, and often appropriate training for educational technology integration, while district students in schools in lower income communities have not consistently been able to access all of these technologies at as fast of a rate. With limited access to affordable high-speed internet, schools and families in historically poorer areas of the city cannot keep up with technology and web-based curricula. This limited access contributes to poor school successes, disadvantages in job competition, poor access to city services, and a perpetuation of the cycle of poverty. The COVID-19 pandemic has starkly underscored this gap in internet equity in the city. Students without high-speed internet and a capable device at home could not participate in online lessons or virtual classroom projects. As schools shuttered their doors and teaching moved online, the quality of education for students without adequate home access to internet and technology plunged, causing the digital divide to expand much further. This bill aims to solve some of these critical problems, and I very much welcome the goals of this bill, and I'm looking forward to a robust discussion on the best path forward to improve the bill so that all of our students and families can have access to the latest internet technologies. Thank you again, Councilmember Allen, for leading the city in this effort. I was happy to sign on as a co-introducer, and I'm looking forward to working together and with our witnesses today to ensure that our shared goal is implementable and workable with all of our partners. So thank you very much, Chairman White, for holding today's hearing.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. So before we hear from our government witness, Octo, we will hear, of course, testimony from our public witnesses. Everyone should have received a copy of the witness list yesterday, and I'm going to call the witnesses in the order they appear on that list, although a couple people had to drop off. When I call you, the staff will promote you to a witness, so you will drop out of the hearing momentarily, and you will return back as a panelist, and you can unmute at that time. Public witnesses will be provided with 4 minutes to testify, and advisory neighborhood commissioners will be provided with 5 minutes to testify. So our first panel, we will have panels of 5: Zinnia Lewis, Grace Hu, Kent Withcomb, Mindy Hill, and Anne Marie Bairstow. Welcome. Zinnia Laws, I'm sorry, I said Lewis, more coffee. Welcome, and you can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson White and members of the committee. My name is Zinnia Laws. I'm a staff attorney in the Consumer Law Unit at the Legal Aid Society. We are testifying today in strong support of the Internet Equity Amendment Act. Our testimony focuses on how legal aid's clients have experienced the digital divide during the COVID-19 pandemic and highlights ways in which the digital divide deepens inequities in access to justice, access to government benefits and services. As participation in digital spaces increasingly becomes the norm and expectation, low-income people and communities of color are left out. Black households are the least likely to own or use a desktop or laptop, own or use a smartphone or tablet, or have a broadband subscription. In Ward 7 and 8, where Black residents account for more than 90% of the population, fewer than 65% of residents have high-speed internet access, compared to 85% in more affluent wards. Reliance on smartphones to access the internet also underscores issues with the digital divide. Households relying only on a smartphone are more likely to be low income or have a Black or Latinx householder. Many of Legal Aid's clients rely on smartphones to access the internet and regularly encounter challenges such as readability issues with small screens, issues uploading documents, restricted data plans, and service suspensions. What may seem like mere technological challenges has major substantive impacts, especially when experienced in the context of trying to participate in remote hearings, applying for benefits, or otherwise accessing critical government services. Inequities in internet access can impact the legal rights of district residents who must now depend on technology to interact with the court system and attend remote hearings. Many of Legal Aid's clients use their phones to call into remote hearings, some with smartphones and some with lower tech devices, and report being dropped from calls or videos during their hearing because they have a poor internet connection or have reached their data allotment. It is not unusual for parties who join by phone audio only to have the call dropped, have trouble muting and unmuting their device, and express confusion about what is happening at the hearing. Sometimes parties who join by phone cannot even be heard to state their name, much less participate in their cases. Parties who speak a language other than English face even more obstacles. While the courts largely remain closed for in-person hearings, the district set up remote hearing sites. While this is an important step, it is insufficient to address the inequities created by the digital divide. These sites are not staffed by court personnel. Residents must receive meaningful support services for remote hearing sites to be effective. As one Legal Aid client unfortunately learned when he traveled to a remote site only to still miss his virtual hearing because he was unable to connect to the hearing using the technology there. Equitable access to high-speed internet service at home is critical to addressing technological barriers that can have a substantive impact on district residents' legal rights, even rights when those barriers impact their ability to effectively access and participate in court hearings. Unequal access to high-speed internet also impacts access to critical district programs and benefits, as low-income district residents are increasingly expected to access government services, programs, and benefits through online platforms. In the last year and a half, many applications for district programs and benefits were optimized to be completed online. These online platforms make the applications more streamlined, but not for many of the district's most vulnerable residents. Low-income district residents with limited or no access to internet encounter problems completing online applications, uploading digital copies of required documents, and getting critical updates about their applications. Paper applications, as they are no longer the default, they are less efficient or time-consuming and create additional expenses associated with traveling or taking time off of work for an in-person appointment. In light of the clear need for affordable, reliable, high-speed internet service, that will enable vulnerable district residents to effectively access the court and the district safety net programs. We are pleased by the introduction of this bill. This bill will ultimately equip policymakers with the guidance needed to close the district's digital divide. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Grace Hu, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Grace Hu. I'm a DCPS parent and one of the co-leads for the Digital Equity and DC Education Parent Coalition. While our focus has been on students, we recognize that DC cannot continue to have a piecemeal, fragmented approach to expanding high-quality broadband access, and that in the long term, our school system should not have to carry the burden of providing internet access to thousands of families with school-age children. I'd like to start off with what happened this past school year, so last school year. DCPS spent millions on LTE-enabled devices, hotspots, and then data plans to support those. Each charter LEA pursued its own solution for internet access. Nonprofits sponsored free internet for a limited number of families. Octo used federal funding to set up the Internet for All program, and there was a small public housing Wi-Fi pilot. Between all these efforts, millions of dollars were spent to connect families to the internet, but there was no overarching plan or coordinating entity to direct resources to where they were most needed and to ensure minimal overlap and duplication, which in turn resulted in inefficient use of funding. Additionally, some of the internet services provided were at lower speeds that were not adequate for households with multiple simultaneous internet users. In a survey of families in all wards that we conducted last school year, 31% said they experienced slowdowns or disconnections while doing online learning. 14% said their personal data plan or home internet plan was not sufficient. On the Internet Equity Amendment Act, we fully support its passage. Without a master internet plan, as mandated by the bill, we fear that DC will continue with this uncoordinated hodgepodge of internet solutions, which will make it difficult to strategically move the city towards universal adoption of high-speed internet. Importantly, the bill requires a timeline and actions that will allow the council and the public to hold the executive branch accountable for concrete progress. We recognize that Octo has been working on possible solutions for expanding internet access, and we recommend you ask Octo for their analysis of internet adoption barriers and statistics. But meetings and discussions are not enough. Until there's a detailed planning document with a timeline, actions, and costs, we remain skeptical that DC will make significant progress anytime in the near future. Effective outreach is a critical part of increasing internet adoption. During the pandemic, DC government has encouraged residents to register for vaccines, apply for rental assistance and other financial assistance, and sign up for free internet programs. These outreach efforts have varied in success. Instead of recreating an outreach mechanism for every government initiative, DC should consider establishing an outreach infrastructure and network that can be used over and over again to provide information and, when needed, technical assistance related to government services and initiatives. And in our written testimony, we refer to a model in Chicago where they developed a network of CBOs and paid them to do the outreach. Lastly, I would like to talk about the private sector. Comcast has submitted comments to you that would water down and delete parts of the internet bill. If our starting point is we don't want to make businesses uncomfortable, that will significantly handicap our efforts to identify the best and the most cost-effective solutions. We think DC needs to take a hard look at all options. And if some of those options make businesses like Comcast uncomfortable, well, they can offer a better deal. Please keep fighting for DC residents, including those who can't hire professional lobbyists to represent their interests. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Next witness is Kent Withicombe.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'm Kent Withicombe, the Education Project Director for the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. The committee has recognized for years that equitable access to technology, training, devices, and reliable high-speed internet is a critical part of its racial and socioeconomic justice mission. The Internet Equity Amendment Act is an important step towards ensuring that all district residents will have reliable and affordable high-speed internet. Equitable digital access for every DC citizen, whether they are in the city, is critical for full participation in all aspects of our economy, our democracy, and our civic life. Yet in the district, equitable access to the internet is divided among race and income. Over 40% of households with annual income below 25,000 lack high-speed home internet. Households in wards 7 and 8 have about 30% less high-speed internet home adoption compared to other wards. Of course, the digital divide grew over the last 18 months as the COVID-19 pandemic meant that more work and education were happening virtually. The committee's work has been focusing on addressing the digital divide's impact on education, which is why we work with digital equity in DC education. Students of color, those in poverty, and students with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by the lack of internet access. And the lack of internet access impacts on student learning and also impacts DCPS's budget. That's what the digital equity just testified to, and Grace Hu. More than 30% of parents who completed the survey said their students often experience internet connectivity issues such as slowdowns and disconnections. Students require high internet speeds for online learning, which requires video conferencing and other bandwidth-heavy applications. Current low-cost internet options provide speeds that are not sufficient for multiple internet users in a household. And inadequate outreach on Octo's Internet for All program led to program under subscription. The lack of high-quality internet access throughout the city forces DCPS to continue spending significant funding on monthly data plans for hotspots and LTE-enabled devices. Urgent action is needed to address the digital divide, and the committee applauds this legislation that recognizes the district's responsibility to ensure that access for all citizens at every location is the same as their responsibility to provide basic services such as clean water and effective sanitation. Reliable, high-speed internet access for all has become a necessity. To strengthen and improve the legislation, the Digital Equity Division must take into account in its published rules the breadth of activities that district residents engage in and the varied locations throughout the city where district residents need to access high-quality internet. A written testimony details proposed changes to lines 70 to 71 in new section 1817B to read recommended minimum upload and download speeds necessary for all district residents, including but not limited to those working from home and those engaging in distance learning. While sufficient broadband speeds for pre-K-12 students and for those working from home clearly are major issues, by focusing on those areas alone, the current legislation inadvertently minimizes all of the other reasons residents need sufficient broadband speed. For example, reliable, efficient broadband speeds are needed by students of all ages attending universities, community college, or technical training, by citizens accessing services related to affordable housing, job searches, training and applications, and telehealth, where citizens of all ages virtually accessing the arts. These examples often require adequate video streaming capabilities or access to large data sets. The Digital Equity Division must also ensure that public internet is strong, fast, and accessible throughout the district, because adequate access and sufficient broadband speeds are important as district residents move around town, and not just while they may be at home, in schools, or public libraries. The Digital Equity Division should also make sure they are ensuring that public Wi-Fi is adequate and accessible in all parts of the city. Ward 7 and 8 historically have also been Wi-Fi deserts. There's far fewer Wi-Fi access points with sufficient range have been located in those wards when compared to other residents. By making this change, legislation will help ensure that all district residents are able to participate in virtual services, including those who are housing insecure or in temporary shelters, in hospitals or assisted living facilities, using public libraries or recreation centers, or in jail, the Youth Services Center, a halfway house, or other restrictive setting. The committee is also encouraged that under this bill, the Digital Equity Division is empowered to explore a municipal broadband option that could significantly reduce the cost of high-speed internet access for district residents. Moreover, it would motivate other internet service providers to increase their internet speed offerings and lower their prices to compete. DC should learn from the successes of municipalities such as the San Francisco Bay Area, Longmont, Colorado, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and from the mistakes made in cities such as Philadelphia. The more successful cities were able to achieve fast download speeds of over 200 megabits per second for extremely affordable rates, and the ubiquity of fast internet access at work and in homes drew more employers and job prospects to those cities and regions. While the focus of the Internet Equity Amendment Act is on ensuring universal high-speed internet access, this is just one part of the digital equity equation. We also urge the council to support legislation and other actions that ensure that district residents have adequate devices to connect to the internet and the training to use them as well. And
Mr. Withycombe, I'm sorry, we're about 2 minutes over your time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I lost track. Yeah.
No problem.
I'm happy to answer other questions. I lost track of the timer. But you know, internet access is important to our democracy, our economy, and our society. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Mindy Hill, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Correct? Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you to the committee for holding this hearing. Leaving no hesitation, whether it's for a Facebook movie caption or getting residents connected to high-speed internet. In 1976, Congress established the Office of Science and Technology Policy to refresh and reinvigorate our national science and technology strategy. And through executive order, the National Science Technology Council was established November 23rd, 1993. From that executive order, numerous efforts have been explored and made recently through the Consolidation Appropriations Act 2021 emerged the Emergency Broadband Benefit, with the FCC working around the clock to extend its expansion efforts by providing a discount up to $50 to $75 per month towards broadband services for eligible households. Now let's speed up to a bandwidth spectrum with services that the District of Columbia provides residents and visitors to enjoy free Wi-Fi access via outdoor and indoor hotspots throughout the district at key community anchor locations. There's no latency in that delivery, and DCNet offers full upload and download speeds, scalability, and reliability with dedicated support. Not sure how access to the internet was functioning prior to introducing B24200 on April 1st, 2021, but as a digital media pioneer, a practitioner and minister of inspiration with over 200 digital content publishings, I understand the need for high-speed internet spectrums and broadband connections. The digital age is expensive, whether it's consumers using a smartphone, tablet, laptop, or desktop with Microsoft operating systems sold separately. I have a few meaningful concerns to share about the creation of the Digital Equity Division with Octo. This is a daunting task for a division if there is an existing Office of Unified Communication. The Office of Cable TV, DC Public Schools, Economic Security Exchange, and Library can consolidate their services, with the Economic Security Administration providing a stipend for DCNet to get the high-speed upload and download connection to the citizens of DC. The Office of Cable TV can do a campaign commercial broadcast at all DC public schools to inform them of the high-speed services DCNet now offers. That would also be very resourceful for the remote learning. COVID didn't provide a fair shot to internet access, and it sure didn't allow the teachers and students' engagement and learning efforts to elevate to a high-speed connection. The city services started to slow down with much latency and many teleworking to wait for the screen to support constituents. Why place an unnecessary burden on the residents when rent is at eviction moratorium levels and already have agencies offer the services, and they could update in a consolidated consortium providing bundle deal support to DC residents through DCNet. If the Economic Security Administration can include a stipend for broadband services, the DCNet standard high-speed network access can use a reinvigorating boost to allocate more broadband spectrum to support access to high-speed internet services. And Octo could have a liaison that specifically supports such functions. This effort would eliminate redundancy on the router, which will cause a delay and would measure the spectrum of creation for an equitable division. What more useful or beneficial if you bundle all agencies on one accord open a broadband spectrum high speed that would be a great way to route high-speed access to the residents in DC. And I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, for this panel, Anne Marie Bairstow, very good to see you.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Anne Marie Bairstow. I'm the director of the Skyland Workforce Center. We're a project of building bridges across the river. We're a collaborative of nonprofit organizations that provide employment-related services in Southeast DC. We provide job search assistance. We teach basic digital literacy, CPR, and construction safety. And then we have partners who provide computer classes, electrical apprenticeship training, entrepreneurship education, small business loans, financial literacy workshops. And then we also have other assistance like warm clothing and bags of food, kind of basic things. I have written out testimony, which I'm going to submit, but some of it repeats some of the things that the council members and other of the witnesses have said. So I'm going to cut a little bit of it out here just for time. But one of the things that we offer is a computer lab that we really kept open through most of the pandemic, even when the libraries were closed. I mean, very limited masks, all that. But and so we just had a big increase of people coming into the computer lab. You know, pre-pandemic, it was all job related because that's what we do. But in the past 18 months, we've helped people apply for and maintain their unemployment, apply for the Stay DC rental assistance program, access Zoom meetings, do virtual job interviews, take classes and tests for classes, build websites to start a small business, get IDs, enroll their children in school, print materials for their kids doing virtual learning, apply for a temporary restraining order, send emails to family members. And then even in one notable case, we helped someone find a Maryland marriage license from 1963 so that they could get an ID. And I would say this list because it just shows you the breadth of what, and you know, I know you all know this, but like this is our like on the ground experience, the breadth of what people need to do with a computer now. And if all of those things present a hurdle for you, like how are you supposed to move forward? Like most of the people that I'm working with, I always say to staff, like haven't been dealt the best hand in life, right? Like they're already facing barriers and difficulties. And so this is just more ways that things are more difficult for people who don't have those resources. And again, I know you all know this, but you know, in order for us to really be a more equitable city, and I think we all know that's so important because we just aren't right now, you know, people in these underserved neighborhoods, they need the equal access or even better access than say my neighbors in Ward 3 where I live, because they need help with getting all of these things done. So I do applaud you all for introducing this act. I hope you pass it. I want to echo some of the, I read some of the testimony from Grace Hu about giving the position of the digital equity director more authority over other agencies, because it's certainly not limited to OCTO. And I think that putting an emphasis on this as an important part of equity writ large is really important, and I applaud the council for doing that. I also want to applaud you focusing on internet speeds, because I mean, we all know, right? If you can't do a job interview if the screen freezes, and you can't participate in class if you can't hear the teacher. And so I think that the council's right not to just take the word of the internet service providers as to what the right speed, but to do an outside evaluation of that and to regularly reevaluate it. I know that there was a version or a suggestion to change access to internet to providing information about. Please don't do that. That is not the same. Providing access and providing information about is not the same. I know it's hard because that's how it is working with the same participants we work, but that's like kind of all the more reason we need to do it. And lastly, I want to say that, well, no, I have two more things. I know I'm running out of time. I'll be quick. The benefits applications, being able to do them on a smartphone and all browsers, that's huge. I want to shout out DHS because they have a really easy to use benefits application, but not all city agencies do. And that's a great thing to do. And then also, I just want to stress the importance of digital education. I know that's not part of this bill, but I work with so many people who maybe don't have the skills. And then it's like this vicious cycle of not having the confidence and comfortability. And like, I mean, we all know, right? You can't make the spreadsheet do the thing you want to do and you get so frustrated. Well, you think, well, it's me. I don't have the computer skills, and you just give up in frustration. And it just pains me to see that all the time. And so I think that is also a key component of digital equity. is also making sure that we're providing the training. And thank you, and sorry for going over time.
No, thank you very much. And, given the work that you all do over there, I was actually particularly interested to hear your testimony. So I have some questions for you, but I know my colleague Charles Allen had to run to a meeting. So let me get moving to questions. Since Anne-Marie Bairstow raised this question from your testimony, Ms. Hu, I did like the idea as well about giving this digital director more authority. I do think many people, and you've raised this many times, they don't know really who's sort of, steering the ship with regard to technology in schools and for students. So Octo is our technology agency, but DCPS, really kind of has a lot of controls and autonomy over technology in schools. So can you talk a little bit more about what you think that might look like and what aspects of daily life or DC government this digital equity director might touch if we thought more comprehensively about it?
Yeah, so there's trade-offs with different options, but I think for me, the key thing is we need a belly button so we can say, yes, you have the authority to coordinate a truly whole of government approach to digital equity, and you are the person who's accountable. So if we're not seeing progress, that is the person we can go to, and they cannot, put the blame or, point to other agencies. So you could have someone who's appointed by the mayor and so is, reports directly to the mayor. That would be on one end of the spectrum. But again, then kind of makes that a more political position that changes over the time. And so, I think there's a spectrum of, equal weight and appointed by the mayor. And then on the other end of the spectrum is having this other division. And so maybe there's also a hybrid approach where could they have some ability to report directly to the mayor, but also be housed still within Octo. I think you can also possibly look at what other cities are doing. I think they've created the equivalent of this. And lastly, it's really important that they have the authority, and that includes over how resources are allocated, because Octo right now has a digital inclusion office. Like, I've met the people, it's a handful of people, but they haven't been funded to do what they need to do. They have a handful of people. And so it's like, how do we empower this? But again, how much do you want to make the trade-off between like a more political person that's close to the mayor versus sort of a career technocrat?
One question also from your testimony, you had mentioned something that many of us saw, including in some of our hearings, which is the issue that many students had with their actual internet connections. We had hearings where students were testifying and, they were breaking up or dropping off. And obviously, if that was happening during a hearing, then it was happening during class. Do you have a sense of how much of this was the strength of the internet that they had access to versus DC public school or charter school technology issues?
It would just be speculation.
Okay.
I mean, and so we had a lot of teachers tell us, yes, about kids falling off, being disconnected. But, in the case of DCPS, for those new computers, they should have been all right. Like, we do have some old DCPS laptops where you never know if it's the laptop or the, internet. But for the new Surface, Microsoft Surface Pros they bought, those should have been okay. But, it'd only be speculation.
Thank you. Ms. Laws, you mentioned something in your testimony that I think is lost on a lot of people, and I'm glad you raised it, which is this issue of service suspensions, people using small screens, I'm guessing telephones, to do really fundamental things. Is that something that you see commonly with your clients?
Yes, like for example, my colleagues have testified extensively in a public benefits unit about applying for unemployment benefits, for example. So, for example, we have clients, or an example of a client who was applying for benefits, but was having a really hard time filling out her claims card. So that information was incorrect on that card. But for that reason, it's just like very hard to see and to answer questions that, are very critical to getting benefits. And if you answer these questions incorrectly, what's at stake when that happens. So the small screens are definitely like an issue when it comes to answering questions, on top of course, like uploading documents and like things of that sort.
And this question is for anyone who may have a perspective, and if not, it's okay, because this is a question that I'll ask to Octo later. But one of the things that Comcast suggested in the testimony they submitted was that everyone has access to internet now. It's just a matter of them kind of realizing that these programs exist, or maybe needing a computer or something else. Does anyone on this panel have a sense of whether there is available now to all residents strong internet or broadband options? Okay.
I believe most residents at least have one internet provider option, but is it affordable? Not necessarily. I mean, I live in Southwest DC. I've gone through 3 providers, but when I first moved in, there was only one, and I kept on changing because the costs and different issues. Yeah.
I wanted to say we do a lot of mentoring with students in schools. I mean, like we do with mock trials, and a lot of times, screens would freeze, or I'd see kids accessing from a McDonald's, and they say, "Well, my other sibling is using the internet at home. I got to do it here." So they're at McDonald's on a phone trying to do a mock trial.
And
I know with T-Mobile, I mean, I've been using like a kind of portable hotspot. For, it's kind of cost effective. So those who can't afford, a Verizon or something of that nature, T-Mobile's hotspot has been very sufficient.
Okay, I appreciate that.
At Skyline, we do have participants who have some of the low-cost internet services, and they'll come into the center to have a higher speed computer so that they can do specifically some of the things that Ms. Laws was talking about, like applying for unemployment or jobs, things that are more complicated than you can do on your small screen or even with low-speed internet.
That's helpful, because I was going to ask you, Ms. Bairstow, whether people came to the Skyline Workforce Center because they needed assistance with forms or maybe access to a computer versus needing internet. So that's informative.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all of the above. I mean, a lot of times people come to us because they know that our staff will help. Like they might be able to even access a computer somewhere else, but there's no one to help them. That's certainly true. But also there are a lot of times, I mean, the small screen thing is huge with us too. And that some of the, a lot of these online job applications, you can't really do them on the phone. Like you might be able to open your browser on the phone, but you can't really actually complete them that way. So, but we also get people who come in because their internet at home is not sufficient. And then, we get a lot of people, and I'm sure Ms. Hu will know this too. We get a lot of people like, well, I do some stuff on my kid's laptop when they're not in school, but they're in school now. So I came up here because I need to do this thing. And we see a lot of that, right? I can only do job interviews after 3 p.m.
Mr. Withycombe, you had mentioned really expanding this bill to make internet more accessible. I'm guessing like in public places. You see that as something that should be part of sort of internet for all effort, and not something that is sort of a separate effort?
Yeah, yes, I do. I mean, I know I've been, in Ward 7 and 8 particularly, and just, calls dropping, things like that. And, the Wi-Fi access points are just not there and like they are for the rest of the city. So it really hurts, people's ability to move about, not just whether they're at school or at home, and to, access the internet for all kinds of reasons.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate this very, very helpful testimonies and responses. Let me turn to my colleague, Brooke Pinto.
Thank you, Chairman White, and thank you all for that testimony, particularly the personal aspects of the testimony, which is really instructive. I want to start with Ms. Laws a question about the eligibility threshold. So right now, the bill defines that Okta would be responsible for identifying lower income households that are connected at a reasonable speed. There's a series of metrics. One of them is a family of four earning $63,000 annually. One of the recommendations that's been made is that as opposed to having an income threshold, we have service providers use a list of people who are already receiving any sort of government benefit to identify who to reach out to. I'm curious, in your experience in dealing with your clients, what you thought of having an income threshold versus beneficiaries or recipients of government benefits as our starting point.
So we are generally supportive of if there is, do you mean means tested? So if someone receives, for example, TANF, then they would automatically, and would that also mean that they would not be paying any percentage of their income as well?
Depends how we structured it, but yes, I think that's one formulation.
So legal aid, we don't really have any comments on this at this time, but I could get back to you with more details after getting some more insight from my colleagues. I think generally we would if low income district residents maybe didn't have to pay anything for internet service as opposed to the 0.5% generally, but for more details, I can get back to you.
Okay, no problem. Anne Marie, go ahead.
I would say you don't just rely on people who are getting benefits. I mean, we have a lot of people who don't get benefits, but are still qualify as low income. We also get people who maybe have returned from prison, haven't been able to get onto benefits lists yet, and that kind of thing. I think using the income threshold is better than just the list of people who are already getting benefits, because I think there are people who would fall out of that if you use that list.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And we certainly don't want people falling through the cracks who, for whatever reason, as you mentioned, returning citizens or undocumented residents who may not be receiving other benefits. Okay, thank you. So we can go to Mr. Withicombe. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Can you speak a little bit about the goal to have the district government provide low-cost, affordable internet to select households, as opposed to expanding the speed, affordability of the existing service providers?
Yeah, I think we saw some of the testimony by Comcast, and in other cities, including the San Francisco Bay Area, smaller cities like Longmont, Colorado, and then Chattanooga, Tennessee. They obviously have internet service providers there, but they've gone to municipal broadband, which is surprising. When I read some of these reports, how fast these average internet speeds, they're well over 100 megabits per second, and many are over 200 megabits per second. And that actually becomes necessary when you think about all the different applications, high data and video applications that people are using for regular use in education and at work and all other contexts. So and that forces the internet service providers to up their game, to provide faster internet speeds at lower costs. So it's definitely worth exploring, and it's definitely worth trying to build that out. And there are a lot of examples to pull from throughout the country.
Okay, thank you very much. And back to that. To that effort, if Ms. Hu or Ms. Hill or anyone else have thoughts on the likelihood of residents switching to a government provided provider for internet service, one of the pieces of pushback we hear is about distrust for the government and a worry of having government be so involved in someone's internet inside their home. Could any of you speak to that concern? How we address it?
I'll just share from experience. I don't think residents would mind. I think residents would be willing to have a government funded type of internet service. As long as you guys do stipulate the privacy protections in there, that would ease a lot of trust. But I do think that that would be very beneficial, and that would actually give the residents, something to consider, sort of like the fair shot, something, for a fair shot. That would definitely give them a fair shot and make them feel very inclusive in the city in providing access.
I think it depends on who's conveying that message. And that's why I talked about an outreach network that we can use over and over again to tell these residents about government services. If you're hearing this from a trusted organization that helps people in your neighborhood and you've worked with them before, that's going to carry more weight than another, being delivered by a faceless government entity. And, there are people who distrust Comcast too. So the distrust runs to multiple options. So I think it depends a lot on the outreach mechanism and how we convey this. And that also that we're transparent about what options exist and the trade-offs of each of the options.
And I would just like to piggyback off of that also. I think the 202 creates these types of, or the Office of Cable TV, I think, like I said, doing some type of campaign to create, and open up that channel for some trust. That would be good. I mean, just basically utilizing the agencies that you already have. That would be great for their outreach and engagement also, if they would help with, some type of promotion. That would also ease any type of government distrust.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are all really helpful and actionable suggestions. That's it for me this round. Thank you all for testifying. Thank you, Chairman White.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto, and thank you to this panel. We will move to our second panel of public witnesses, which will include Joe Paul, Casey. All right, get my list back up. Joe Paul, Casey Walther, Yvette Banfield, Laura Miller Brooks, and Claudia Herrera. Joe Paul, welcome.
Hey, how are you doing, Mr. Chairman?
Doing well. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, fantastic. Good to be here.
Good, good. You can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you again, and thank you so much for your service to the district. Councilwoman Pinto, thank you so much. And to the esteemed District of Columbia City Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak together today. I'm Joe Paul, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of Bite Back. We've been fighting for digital equity in DC since 1997. And at Bite Back, we transform lives by providing access to the digital world through inclusive tech certification training, digital literacy training, and digital advocacy. On behalf of Bite Back and the thousands of lives that we've had the pleasure of transforming, we thank you for hosting a hearing regarding internet equity. Internet access is a civil rights issue. COVID-19 provided a spotlight on the most glaring equity issues we face as a society, and digital equity, digital inclusion, internet and broadband access are at the top of that list. Biteback sees this problem as a three-legged stool, if you will. The broadband and internet access is one leg. The actual tool required to take advantage of the access, the laptop or desktop, is another leg. And the training required to use the tools that provided the access to the internet is another leg. And that's where Biteback comes in. We cannot change lives if our program participants lack internet access. We cannot change lives if our program participants lack high-speed internet access. Our communities don't just need internet access, they need equitable access to high-speed internet. Approximately 25% of district households do not have broadband service. That's close to 170,000 people that are affected. And that problem doesn't necessarily stop there. Internet access, the tools and the skills required to provide access are essential for full digital citizenship. Biteback supports and have advocated for the creation of a digital equity office for years. We need to catch up to other cities that have created similar offices, including Baltimore, where we have a major presence. To prioritize digital inclusion in the long term, this office is absolutely key. And in order to help close that digital divide, DC must first understand its gaps and the extent of the problem. While having Wi-Fi available in DC streets and public areas is absolutely a great step, we also need to prioritize residents by prioritizing in-home broadband access. There are seniors who deserve to participate in this global economy, but they can't. There are children who need to attend classes and conduct critical thinking research, and they can't. There are program participants who want Biteback's help, and we want to help, but they need access to trainings that we provide, and they cannot access them because they lack internet access. They don't just need access. They need universal high-speed internet access coupled with adequate devices. They need training on telehealth and online banking, which we help provide. They need us to speak on their behalf. Through this legislation, we believe it's a great start towards moving toward digital equity, but it doesn't address the device gap and the digital literacy gap that still exists. Not having an in-home device is one of the main barriers for households to not sign up for the internet. It's not that they don't need it. Not having digital skills to use the internet is also a main barrier for not signing up for affordable internet. Without all these areas addressed and many more, DC will not close the gap with the internet alone. So again, I just want to say on behalf of Biteback and the thousands of lives that have come through our doors, thank you for providing, thank you for the opportunity for me to provide my testimony. And I believe together we'll be able to close the digital divide. You may be on mute, Mr. Chairman.
I knew that. Thank you. Thank you very much. See, I don't see our next witness, so I'm trying to. Okay. Okay, I am just thinking, is Yvette Banfield with us? There you are. Wonderful. Good to see you.
Hi, good. It's afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so good afternoon, Councilmember White and members of the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities. I'm Yvette Banfield, Vice President of Economic Development Policy and Wealth Building Strategies at the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development. And, you know, I've listened to some of the testimony, so I too need to submit my testimony, but so what I'm going to do is just really go to some of the recommendations or suggestions that we propose, because many of the folks that have testified before me have lifted up some of the issues that I've outlined as well. CNHED is in full support of the legislation that's being put forth today. But what we'd like to do is CNHED requests council to consider ways to further strengthen the legislation and eliminating existing barriers to high-speed internet. CNHED urges council to foolproof technologies that are scalable, with a preference for 100 megabytes per second for both upload and upload speeds, or higher. For the high-speed internet to be truly equitable, we urge the district to examine further how we define minimum standards for upload and download speed. For district residents to have reliable internet connection, a strong case can be made that the FCC regulations aren't high enough, given the increased usage and reliance on the internet and the advancements in internet speed, which others are using, who are paying market rate for the service, and the advancements in technology. CNHED also urges council to address the issue of internet adoption and access simultaneously to ensure it reflects the needs of thousands of low-income, unemployed, and unskilled residents, or residents that are enrolled in training programs, and adult learners that lack access to high-speed internet, devices, and digital literacy. For example, the Digital Equity Division should explore and propose ways for the district to partner with workforce development provider organizations and the Department of Employment Services to gather real-time data and information on who has access to high-speed internet and digital devices. This legislation provides the district also an opportunity to better understand how the barriers to access to high speed impacts adults enrolled in a workforce training program, as well as adult learners. I know through a lot of the conversation, I've heard that a lot of attention and focus on school-age children, which I think is extremely important. But I think that we also have to look at the parents, because the parents are the teachers, the parents also the role models for their children. And if they don't know how to use the internet, or if the family doesn't have access to the internet, if the parent doesn't know how to use digital devices, it is a reflection on the child's learning as well, or it impacts the child's learning. The district must do more to eliminate the barriers that exist for low-income residents without a laptop or digital devices and basic digital proficiency. CNHED was surprised to learn that there's a subset of commercial corridor businesses in the district operating without internet and rely on their mobile devices. For a host of reasons, these businesses lack access to high-speed internet service. It's too expensive. The business may be operating on thin profit margins, or they may lack digital proficiency because they're older or they're immigrant business owners. We also heard that some business owners may only have a home computer. So with that said, we also would like to propose that maybe council also consider and look at a quasi-public option when you're thinking about also the internet, the district being an internet service provider. We support the idea that the district should explore this. Digital equity means ensuring everyone, regardless of income, race, or neighborhood, have access to high-speed internet technology and digital devices. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next witness is Laura Miller Brooks. Are you with us?
I am.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman White, Councilmember Pinto, and members of the Committee on Government and Operations Facilities. My name is Laura Miller Brooks, and I'm the Federal City Council's Transportation and Infrastructure Associate. The Federal City Council applauds the Council's Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021 in its approach to the problem of digital connectivity as an equity issue. Though digital inequities have long persisted in the district, the pandemic laid bare the stark inequities of how district residents access and use digital services. By making digital inclusion a cornerstone of COVID recovery, the district can address long-term structural inequities and increase economic opportunity for residents who have been most impacted by the COVID crisis. Unfortunately, as it is written today, this legislation hinders rather than helps the district increase internet access for all residents. Language in the bill limits the district's ability to secure and implement federal funding and fails to tackle the broader issue of access, which is adoption, and what our research shows to be the primary challenge in increasing internet access for uninterconnected residents. Since June of 2020, the Federal City Council has conducted research, tracked the rapidly changing federal funding and policy landscape, and worked alongside local government agencies like OCTO, community-based nonprofits like Skyland, and private sector stakeholders to define the issue of access in the district and to develop a path towards addressing this multifaceted challenge. A key policy finding from our research is that the primary barrier to access for district residents is adoption rather than infrastructure. Research from our work as co-chairs of Okta's Tech Together Access Working Group revealed that of the 53,000 households in the district that do not have high-speed internet connectivity in their homes today, just 3,000 of these residents lack access as a result of inadequate infrastructure. We also found the primary barriers to adoption are relevance and cost. Of the 50,000 households who don't have access because of adoption gaps, 42% of them are in wards 7 and 8, though they only represent 22% of the population. Roughly 22% of DC households would have to pay more than 2% of their gross income to afford the national average of an internet service subscription, which is $60 per month. This legislation does little to provide the language, funding, or implementation framework necessary to comprehensively address the challenges of adoption. The Federal City Council's primary concern about this legislation is how it interacts with or hinders the district's ability to access and leverage federal investment. Since this bill was first introduced in April 2021, the federal funding and policy landscape have changed dramatically. And on the horizon, the bipartisan infrastructure package provides nearly $100 million in additional funding opportunities for the district to invest in digital connectivity initiatives over the next 5 years. In order to maximize once-in-a-generation federal funding, the district should position our regulatory landscape to match federal regulations, especially such progressive and bold ones. Today, federal funding is the clearest path for the district to secure the resources necessary to do the hard, broad work of closing the digital divide. The Federal City Council encourages the council to make sure that any new language does not diminish the city's ability to compete for and win federal funds. As written today, we believe the Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021 could have this effect. District residents are best served if we capture as much federal money as possible and streamline our processes that allow the district to implement that funding. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this issue.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Claudia Herrera, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning, council members, friends, neighbors, and community leaders. My name is Claudia, and I am a current BITEBAC student right now. BITEBAC is a nonprofit whose mission is to provide a pathway for inclusive technology training that leads individuals to having living wage careers. I am also a mother of a wonderful student here in DC, a mentor, a friend, a sister, and I am a Ward 4 voting constituent. Those of us who have lived in DC all of our lives can attest to the struggle of not only raising a family in DC, but also having to make ends meet in a city where an ever-increasing cost of living is on the rise. The pandemic exacerbated, as a lot of you mentioned, the issues and brought to light the extreme socioeconomic disparities in the nation's capital, which some of us have always known were there. Although DC is the recipient of many federal funds that have allowed some of us to continue living here, and for which I am grateful to be a recipient, I have found that the struggle during the pandemic made clear the necessity of internet access and reliable access at that. DC did provide services to students through a low-cost program, but the internet access was unreliable and slow. I had no choice but to keep paying $2 shy of $100 a month to my internet provider in order to keep myself and my family connected, whether the funds were there or not. The subsidized program only allowed for 1 or 2 devices to connect, one which lagged and the other which was not a guarantee to connect. This was unacceptable. For those families whose household housed more than one student, for when one student connected to be online in classes and another student had to do research for homework, only one was able to do so. In my home, at least 4 devices connect to an internet router at once. With a low-cost internet program, this would not have been possible. Either I would not be able to do work or find additional work, or my family would not be able to attend their classes as well, or partake from other activities that required video downloads or app downloads that required large capacity. Even after the pandemic, my household continues to connect through a pricey internet provider in order to adjust to the new normal, where meetings, conversations, file sharing, work, and other forms of daily life activities are now taking place through the use of internet, thereby making internet access not only a necessity, but a profitable business for companies. For those of us who need technology to better ourselves, as I am doing at Bite Back, I look forward to being able to use the services that DC provides without having to sacrifice my family's need for internet access as well. Consider allowing all DC families to have access to fast internet that is affordable. Families who are resilient and committed to doing all that we can to bring success to our families. We will thank you. I will thank you. I appreciate the time that you have afforded me, and I hope that my words and those of your constituents do not go unheard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And the final person on this witness list is Robert Oliver. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
On this panel, not the witness list, final person on this panel.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, first, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this very valuable effort that is being committed to by the city. The Federation of Library Friends of the DC Public Library wholeheartedly support the Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021. COVID-19 exposed a gaping technological chasm known as a digital divide. Those with the appropriate internet bandwidth, software, and equipment were able to work from home, educate their children, and lead a restricted but normal life. Others could not. The Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021 allows the creation of a digital equity division within the Office of the Chief Technology Office. The mission of the Digital Equity Division is to ensure that all district residents have equitable access to high-speed internet. The Friends and the DC Public Library share this goal. Two of the most popular library services over the years have been the free computer usage and Wi-Fi access. On any given day, patrons would patiently wait for access to a computer. The DC Wi-Fi service kept some patrons long after the library closed its doors. The need for digital equity was always in plain sight, but COVID-19 made it clear. Once the pandemic-related shutdowns began, patrons who relied on DCPL and other DC agencies no longer had computer access for weeks on end. For example, the Lamont Riggs Interim Library and other small DCPL libraries locations remain closed after the larger branches opened out of an abundance of caution. The Lamont Riggs Library Friends requested that DCPL activate the Lamont Riggs Wi-Fi device during the closure. That simple gesture allows some to access data on their phone and to reconnect with the wider society again. The Friends applaud the Digital Equities Division's focus on upload and download speeds. However, that is only part of the puzzle. Internet bandwidth should be considered also. The number of internet sessions active and the applications used will stress low bandwidth households. Hardware is another issue to consider. DC has provided many of the impoverished with flip phones. These devices provide basic service, but little more. Please consider upgrading these to a more robust cell phone for this population. The Friends also applaud the reporting deadlines and criteria mandated by the Act. Providing equitable internet service to all DC residents cannot be effectively managed if it is not effectively measured. In closing, the Federation of Library Friends of the DC Public Library strongly support the passage of the Internet Equity Amendment Act of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much to this entire panel for your testimonies. Let me start with Ms. Banfield. You had recommended 100 megabytes per second. Where does this come from, this particular speed recommendation?
So I think when you look at some of the efforts in other cities, that's what they're advocating, given the issues and challenges that were mentioned today in terms of multiple family members using devices. And when you look at apartment complexes where everyone is online, and then also, you know, the number of speed that's required, or in terms of using different like Zoom and uploading and downloading documents. And so I think when you look at the direction that we're going, the adoption and the way in which we're using technology has shifted. And so we need to then reevaluate the speed. And because a lot of folks have complained that 50 megabytes per second isn't sufficient. And so 50 and 25. And so we need to kind of reevaluate that and think futuristically, what should be the goal and the aim. And I also think when we're thinking about equity, should we provide the floor for residents that also really need the services to participate in training programs, to be able to access internet information and communicate with others that are assisting and supporting them. So I think others around the country are kind of echoing that it should be higher, as opposed to just going what the requirement is for the FCC, or what Comcast or any other industry that's making a profit from this are willing to provide.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, in your experience with ByteBack, obviously you all work with a lot of DC residents. Do you have a sense of this question? There is a question about whether this is an adoption problem, that is to say we have the resources versus an access or performance problem, to say that no, there are still a lot of people who don't have access to the internet, or at least don't have access to a strong enough internet for their needs. Do you have a sense of what your experience is, or the people that you serve?
Absolutely. And I think Claudia Herrera could definitely share some real world empirical evidence on what we're experiencing. But definitely, it's a combination of the three. It's a combination of adoption, where how do you use the tools that you actually have, and how do you navigate and get through? How do you have access, and making sure that you have the not just internet access, but the right access. I think 100 megabytes is a good start. I'd even go so far as 200, depending on the household and depending on how many devices are connected. And it's also a performance issue, because a lot of our folks don't have the right tools that's required. In many cases, we provide refurbished laptops, and you know. And the COVID-19 actually exacerbated a lot of our problems, because our bread and butter is really providing this digital literacy training, this technical training in person, and providing these necessary wraparound services for the marginalized communities that we serve. And when COVID-19 happened, a lot of folks lacked access. They didn't have broadband access that was required to access the training. They didn't have the tools required to use it, and they also didn't have the necessary training on how to use it. Even going a little step deeper, we're finding out that there are literacy training issues, not even digital literacy. And so, but I think it's a combination of the three. It's a combination of access. It's not as much adoption, because folks actually know how to use, but it's also the performance on getting access and having multiple users at once.
Thank you. And Ms. Herrera, I do particularly want to thank you for your testimony. Is particularly enlightening in terms of understanding this question about adoption of existing programs versus access. So let me bring this question to Ms. Miller Brooks. In the work that the Federal City Council did you all look at internet speeds and cost, or just whether or not someone could access the internet?
So great question. And again, appreciate hearing the testimony of everyone else and these perspectives. I think when I, in the testimony I just gave, I was really just talking about access to high-speed internet in your home. And that was high speed as defined by the FCC today, though OCTO And the Tech Together Working Group on Access set that like goal and benchmark at 100 and then 20 up down megabits. And so but that number of 53,000 households who do not have access to high-speed internet services in their homes today is at the current, I think that was even done on the just 25 and 3. So, the gap might be much greater on that 100, but I think the point being right is that the infrastructure for getting people 100 over 20 type level speeds is really, it's there, it's wired, it's in the ground. It's too expensive, it's too much of a hassle. People are not seeing that as, as Ms. Herrera said, it was $200 a month. For some households, that just is not something that fits into the monthly budget or those needs, right? So I think there's then the access to devices and then access to skills and then better government services. And again, that's the kind of comprehensive approach that we really believe is needed. And that's what, our perspective is just this federal investment could be the type of funding to allow us to do community grants to organizations like Bite Back, more computer labs near neighborhoods that have underconnected households, right? And I think this issue of relevance, in addition to cost, for why would I have broadband in my home, is a social infrastructure issue. It's it again gets back to why am I prioritizing that over other services I'm paying for? And ultimately, a solution might be mobile long term. So I think this is all to say that it's a big gap, and I think the gap's evolving as we're having this conversation.
So on the federal piece, there's an old saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I'll say very little about the infrastructure bill because, I've been to this movie a lot of times. I was a young Capitol Hill staffer when Obama was going to get an infrastructure bill done. And then we just knew that Trump was going to get it done because it was bipartisan. And now we know, again, we're going to get it done. And, we're waiting to see, as one of my staff just mentioned, we're going to hang our hopes on Joe Manchin. So we'll see where this goes. I continue to be optimistic, but also not foolish. But you raised an important point that I have a question about, which is you're suggesting that DC may kind of take a path that would hurt our ability to get federal funds. How so?
So I didn't want to bore everyone. That's in my written testimony that I submitted. Even if the bipartisan infrastructure package doesn't pass, looking at specifically an example of these capital project funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which is infrastructure funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, right? So that every federal program that we're going to get is going to have strict grant guidelines for how we can access that money and then how it can be administered. And as a result, in the case of the CPF grant under ARPA, that grant program requires that the chief executive assign a designee to administer the grant program. This bill, our local bill, and the creation of a new role to oversee digital equity could conflict with the mandate of actually accessing these grant program funds and implementing that. So it might splinter our ability or outright prevent our ability to access some of this grant funding. And then other language around minimum speeds, definitions of equity and access, and requirements for agency studies. All of that language is embedded in, certainly in the bipartisan infrastructure package, but in the competitive grant programs as well. So again, the intent of this bill is fully there. When it was introduced in April 2021, none of what kind of my argument was really relevant. But because we have this opportunity, I think that we should be very cautious about how our local regulations align with some of these federal opportunities to catalyze this work.
Appreciate it. Ms. Herrera, you had mentioned that you have access to the internet at home, but it is not always sufficient, particularly when there are multiple people using it. Is that still the case?
Unfortunately, I had to dish out the money, and I didn't have a lot of options in terms of who the provider was. And I feel like a lot of individuals, a lot of moms, a lot of families that I speak to, It really depends where you live. I don't have an option, unfortunately, to choose who my provider is. And that one provider is the only one that's given me access. And whether I can afford it or not, when you have multiple people using, the router is going and we're downloading and I do have a cap and my cap is 200 and I pay extra for that. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to benefit from any of the other services the DC was providing for internet. It just was not feasible. So I really just had to figure out a way of just paying for it.
And Mr. Oliver, obviously I really appreciate the perspective of the Federation of Library Friends. A lot of our residents go to the library to access the internet, to use computers. And so similar question, you discussed some of this in your testimony, but similar question to what I posed to Mr. Paul or Ms. Bairstow in the last panel. How much of the internet activity that we see at our DC public libraries is due to insufficient internet access versus insufficient access to, let's say, like computers or printers?
That's a very good question. I'll say this. The vast majority of people who are coming to the library come because, on the most part, we have the latest and better equipment. We have the bandwidth necessary and the appropriate speeds. Some of those who come in may just have a cell phone and not much else. And so because of that, they're taking advantage of, in which they should, the equipment that the city is providing through the library. Also, we have always dealt with a very large homeless population, as you know, that they don't have much in terms of equipment on them personally. So they benefit from that. As the city and everywhere else has moved to moving GED and other learning opportunities, even the newspaper online, these folks are being left out and had been left out when the library and other organizations like the Department of Parks and Rec, which also have computers available, closed their doors. So we put an extreme burden on these folks. And as I've said, COVID-19 exacerbated a situation that we already knew was there.
Right. I appreciate it. Councilmember Pinto, do you have questions for this panel? She may be jumping.
I do not. Thank you all very much, though.
Thank you. I want to make sure. So let me say this as we close up. One of the things I am hearing over and over again is that we, even as we explore this this broadband question, we do still have an issue with access to computers and maybe other devices for our residents, and that's something that we have to take seriously as well. I also do want to mention, just because I heard it, but it didn't, I don't have questions about it at this time. Ms. Banfield, your point in your testimony about addressing, as we address adoption and accessibility, also understanding, using opportunities to understand barriers that people have, and recognizing that there are businesses. I had not thought about that, but yes, makes sense. There are businesses in the city that don't have access to internet, may not have computers as well, and that's something that we need to be conscious of, because certainly it will have a disproportionate impact on minority businesses, and as you said, maybe particularly some immigrant communities. So that's something that we do need to keep on our radar as we have these discussions. So thank you again to this panel. Very, very much appreciate your testimony today. And we're going to move to our final panel before the Chief Technology Officer, and it will include Commissioner Antoine Holmes and Commissioner Aaron Palmer. Antoine Holmes is Commissioner for ANC 7C-OC, and Aaron Palmer is Commissioner for ANC 4B-02. Commissioner Holmes, welcome, and you can begin your testimony when you're ready. Good to see you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you. So good afternoon, Chairman White and members of the Committee for Government Operation. My name is Antoine Holmes. I am the ANC Neighborhood Advisory Commissioner for Single Member District 7C07, which encompasses the Deanwood neighborhood. During our previous hearing for the Committee of the Government Operations Performance Overview Oversight hearing prior to the pandemic on 1/16/20, ANC 7C highlighted the need for the council to increase Octo's budget to address the following matters. One, to create a municipal Wi-Fi mesh network to close the digital divide in Ward 7, 8, and various other neighborhood corridors within the district. Two, to increase funding to upgrade the DC1 card to a common access card to improve cybersecurity. Two, increase funding for WebEx licensing to extend video and voice conferencing to all ANC commissions and the council to host monthly meetings. Four, increase funding for Office 365 and to implement implement a digital signature solution to increase ANC efficiency and reduce paper waste. And five, to increase wired and wireless broadband in DPR recreation centers, DCPS schools, DCPL libraries to support the growth of youth activities, especially in the rec centers, esports. Now, as highlighted by the pandemic, the lack of addressing the digital divide, broadband inequity, has led to inadequate remote learning and exposed the homework gap that has always existed throughout many parts of the district. DCPS and Connect DC were able to address this matter in the short term with MiFis and LTE-enabled tablet PCs and partner with internet service providers to promote low-cost internet. However, these solutions were neither cost-effective nor supported sufficient broadband speeds to support multi-hour voice and video remote learning. All right, so over the decade, the district has been trying to solve digital divide through various infrastructure programs. In 2011, Octo was looking for partners to deploy last mile internet to extend DC CAN network throughout all 8 wards. In 2017, DDOT has been discussing the need to upgrade all district streetlights to utilize LED to improve visibility and safety. Hopefully the future DC Smart Street Light P3 project, RP, lists that the implementation of Wi-Fi to support broadband connectivity in Ward 7 and 8 is part of its scope. In 2018, the district agencies and telecom providers discussed the need to implement 5G small cells throughout the city, improving telecommunications and Octo would use these small cell implementations to incorporate and extend Wi-Fi deployments. And on September 2019, Councilmember Gray, the DC Citizens Association, DC Federation of Civic Association, all Ward 7 ANC councils hosted a meeting for 5G cell towers at Ron Brown High School to discuss deployment of health, its deployment, health, and environment impacts with DOH, DOE, DDOT, and the telecom providers. As someone who's attended all of those meetings over the last decade, ANC 7C and the Deanwood community has always recommended and supported Wi-Fi and fiber deployments as a reliable broadband solution. So therefore, ANC 7C continues to support and recommend that the council create policy and funding that allows Octo to complete the following: extend the DC Wi-Fi network beyond district buildings and parks to create a true municipal Wi-Fi mesh network, improve wired and wireless broadband speeds at schools, recreation centers, and libraries, improve hybrid meeting capability with investments in video and voice conferencing platforms, improving the district's cybersecurity posture with investments in security tools that can monitor and protect the increased number of devices on the network when the broadband is expanded. So in closing, I want to thank the committee for having this hearing and for Octo for supporting ANC 7C and all the ANCs with their portfolio of capabilities. But we do look forward to working with everyone to implement universal broadband for every district resident, because ultimately what we want to see is that all district families start to have internet access treated more as a utility instead of a luxury expense. Thank you, and I'll be around for questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Palmer.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, this is school pickup time today, so I'm en route. Thank you, Councilmember White and other members and staff of the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities for taking the time to hear from the public about the Internet Equity Amendment Act and the path to universal high-speed internet. My name is Erin Palmer. I'm a resident of Ward 4 and Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for Single Member District 4B02 in Tacoma. In May 2020, Advisory Neighborhood Commission 4B approved a resolution calling for assessment of and a plan to broaden municipal internet. Specifically, that resolution called for immediate collection of robust data regarding internet access, including reliability metrics such as bandwidth across the district, and an assessment regarding gaps in internet access and government programs, including a review of the offerings, funding, and support for Octo's Connect DC Digital Inclusion Initiative, a review of implementation of DEMPED's 2016 Pathways to Inclusion report recommendations, and a citywide technology survey, and an immediate and comprehensive assessment of possibilities for broadening municipal internet and ensuring its reliability that provides policymakers a menu of options at various price points, takes full advantage of existing public infrastructure, considers a phased approach that prioritizes parts of the district with the lowest home broadband adoption rates, and the possibility of piloting free internet access to low-income areas, including public housing, and considers all possible public funding streams, including from the federal government. I am attaching this commission resolution to my testimony. The proposed legislation is in line with these recommendations. It sets a requirement that all district residents have equitable access to high-speed internet, including by developing minimum standards for upload and download speed, and sets a plan that is intended to reach that requirement. This is the right framework for attaining the desired goal of ensuring high-quality internet for all district residents as a basic need. Importantly, the proposed master internet plan requires a description of the timeline and actions to ensure that all district residents have high-quality internet. Oversight is crucial to ensure metrics are set and that the government is meeting those metrics. In addition, the master internet plan would require information regarding internet adoption rates, a description of the publicly and privately owned infrastructure, and details regarding agreements between DC government and government entities to expand access. At a base level, it is essential to understand who has internet, under what program, and at what level of service, to understand both where gaps exist and where existing programs overlap and may be streamlined or improved as to efficiency. The master plan also calls for information regarding public engagement. We know the district has faced many challenges getting federal and local relief money and government services in people's hands, whether that's voter registration or vote by mail, vaccinations, or assistance programs. And we need a coordinated, dedicated approach to communicating with residents. Internet for All, for example, is undersubscribed, and that's not based on a lack of need, but more likely insufficient outreach and overcomplicated administrative burdens. We need to be able to reach residents in need, and they need to be able to easily apply for and obtain available funds and services. The district should invest in creating a network and other infrastructure, taking advantage of the connections local community organizations have to communicate out and assist residents, particularly low-income residents, non-English speakers, those with limited mobility, and others. I've seen some testimony arguing that setting internet speed requirements raises legal concerns if a certain quality of internet is needed for telework, virtual learning, and accessing government programs and services, as I think this legislation intends. And if private entities cannot meet that need, that is exactly when the government must step in. I support inclusion in the master plan of a description of the viability of building district-owned infrastructure, and I encourage the use of independent experts to evaluate and assess this viability and not rely on companies with a vested interest in profit margins. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much to both commissioners. One of the things that came up in Commissioner Palmer's testimony that has come up in one way or another during each of our panels, although not stated this way, is the question of how we view access to the internet, or whether we view it as an essential utility in a way that maybe we didn't a few years ago. And if we do, then what responsibility is that put on the government for expanding its own infrastructure? And that's an important question, but it's also a legal question. And so I hope to hear some discussion of that from Octo, but it is something that we have to understand. One thing, Commissioner Holmes, you mentioned the need to expand internet access at our public recreation facilities. Commissioner Palmer, you mentioned something similar, but for public housing. I think this bill would apply to public housing, but I now need to check to make sure. But Commissioner Holmes, do you think that we need to look at expanding the scope of this bill such that we are not just looking at internet access for residential places, but that we need to expand it further? And would you say just further to DPR facilities, or even further than that?
I would say that if so long as DC is the provider for all of the neighborhood anchors, and they're all mostly district buildings, that they should have the best internet wired, which is not the case at some of the locations. And there's even, for example, in Deanwood, the library has higher speeds than the recreation side of the building. So with those types of inconsistencies, we would hope that a part of it was to make sure that everybody is having good bandwidth implemented, both wired and wirelessly, especially at all district buildings, and then continue to expand from those locations all throughout the neighborhoods.
Okay. Commissioner Palmer, you had mentioned, obviously we have to set metrics, and that it will require oversight to make sure we meet those metrics. I agree, and that's part of the discussion we're going to have with Octo. So less of a question and more of just saying, yeah, we need to know exactly kind of what our goals are, with real specificity. Do we want everyone to have internet access? Yeah, but that's not specific enough. At what speeds and what sort of maximum cost per household. So I think we do have to be very intentional about our metrics, because we can meet our goal, but we have to make sure the goal is the right one. So again, we heard disparate testimony about whether or not everybody does have access to internet. But then we heard testimony from some people saying, look, I have access to internet, but it's not sufficient for real life. So I'm completely with you on that, and look forward to engaging in that discussion with Octo. The only other question I have, a little off subject, but since you raised it, Commissioner Holmes, and we have two commissioners here, you mentioned one request is for WebEx access for commissioners. Is that something you still think is important? Now folks are using, Zoom and some other technologies, but do you think it's still important to have WebEx specifically?
Absolutely. Again, now I do this at work, so we'll get into it. There are definitely specific needs for specific tools on why you want to do things. Was quite certain that we were going to go all WebEx for the council meetings as well. I see that we're Zoom platform. We also have Microsoft Teams that also gets used as well. They all kind of play with each other and kind of don't, and they all have their strengths and their weaknesses. Ultimately, yes, in terms of this hybrid solution that we want to continue to have meetings after February, which is something we'll talk about the ANC meeting, we want to be able to continue to extend that, whether that platform be WebEx, be Microsoft Teams, or if it be Zoom. I can leave that to the CTO to decide based on the technical specifications on that. What I'm looking for is to be cost efficient on that. If you're leveraging the Office 365, or if you're having the WebEx account, if you're doing the Cisco account. So yeah, I leave that to the CTO to decide that, but what I want to see it everywhere. I want to see it at our rec centers. I want to make sure that we can continue to have testimonies like this, whether I'm at home or if I go down to the rec center, or if they do it at the schools, so that we're not all trouncing back at the Wilson building.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I appreciate that. I'm with you on that, and so I'm glad I asked for clarification. Is there anything before we close this panel, move to the government witness? Anything else that either of you commissioners think is important to get on the record?
No, I'm glad you also brought up, a lot of people are talking about small businesses, minority businesses being able to have that same, availability of affordability of internet, knowing that some of the solutions that we get over here, even at our ANC office, we don't have as many options. Like if I want residential, I can pick from the three big providers in the town to get that. They're going to charge me 75 plus $80 if I want that gigabit so that the whole family can do their work at the same time. But if it's at the ANC office or if it's at a business account, I get one choice. And that one choice is expensive, 200 plus a month, just like I heard others said around here. So that definitely is something that the scope of it for being able to do small, for entrepreneurs, et cetera, to be able to connect, as well as families, is very important. So thank you for expanding to that.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today, and thank all of our public witnesses. So with that, we will move to our government witnesses. Thanks again to the commissioners and to all of our public witnesses. And we will give Chief Technology Officer Lindsay Parker a moment to log in. Welcome, good to see you today.
Hi, Councilmember.
As you know, it is the practice of this committee to place our government witnesses under oath. I would ask that you raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide to the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You can begin your statement when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Councilmember White, members of the committee and staff. I'm Lindsay Parker, the Chief Technology Officer for the DC government and most recently named the Assistant City Administrator as well. Excited to talk about topics today that are near and dear to my heart and things that will help improve city services, but also our city for years to come. COVID-19 only served to amplify what we already know. As most of the city went virtual, accessing remote classrooms, telehealth solutions, virtual trainings, and online interviews over the past 18 months was not possible for some households, including many in traditionally underserved neighborhoods of our city. And while the vaccine rollout has enabled the US recovery and reopening, the trend towards automation and use of digital channels for work, education, health, and commerce signal that the imperative to close the digital divide remains. Mayor Muriel Bowser launched the Tech Together DC initiative this past year with the goal of bringing together representatives from government, nonprofits, industry experts, and academia to work together to do just that and address the divide. Keeping in mind DC priorities for a resilient and equitable recovery, as well as enabling DC residents for an increasingly digital future, we kicked off priority setting working sessions with the Tech Together DC community this summer. A number of the witnesses here today joined us in that conversation, aiming to develop sustainable solutions and a roadmap to get there. Our discussion centered around access to the internet, which includes the infrastructure needs, and we talked a little bit about that, but also adoption. Accessing the internet has to prove relevant and affordable for a household to make the decision to use it. Closing the digital divide is not just about solving for universal broadband. In fact, that might be the easiest issue to solve for. This is why our Tech Together DC work is focused on 3 areas: access to internet services, increasing access to internet-enabled devices and technical support, and demystifying technology through training and increased access to opportunities. The latest census numbers show that around 50,000 households in Washington, DC don't have home internet. That said, more than half of those households do have a smartphone now, and having a home internet connection is becoming evidently less and less relevant to them in a series of surveys that we've seen. Only about 3,000 households aren't able to access high-speed internet infrastructure, according to NTIA research, which, just so everybody is clear, that's super in line with our peer cities. That 3,000 number is typically because of new development or literally neighborhoods or areas that have not been developed and have not historically had a road coming by, so therefore no fiber connection. We don't have an infrastructure problem as much as an adoption challenge. For example, there are a significant number of residents that lack the digital literacy skills to engage in basic online tasks like job searches, telehealth sessions, and digital government benefits. And yet others who lack digital literacy or job skills needed to productively use the internet due to barriers in relevance, training capacity, and accessibility. So the work of the Tech Together DC Pledge Partners continues. And I look forward to being able to talk more about the group's findings in the weeks to come, but we're collating information that we've received, ensuring that we're reflecting the work that's already being done by these pledge partners in the roadmap, and making sure that we have the latest and greatest on sort of the federal dollars that are contemplated to sort of come our way. So the only caution that I do want to impress upon you and your colleagues as you consider this important topic is that we have a very opportune moment to use federal funds to address this divide. And I would argue that this is a unique moment that arises from an unprecedented bipartisan commitment to address broadband gaps. I don't think that we're going to see this again, this moment. We anticipate that once Congress determines that sort of major rural broadband infrastructure issues have been largely addressed, it's going to be really hard to find bipartisan support to address historical inequities affecting more urban areas, right? This is another reason why we need a vote in the House and the Senate. And as the federal government continues to determine how they plan to get this money out to local jurisdictions, I wouldn't want any new laws getting in the way of our ability to access those resources by stipulating that we have to do X or Y by a certain date. Wouldn't want to sort of get ahead of what we're already assuming is going to be a pretty regimented, some pretty regimented requirements in regards to going after these federal dollars. So I look forward to the conversation and addressing any questions that you may have. Cautioning that there's some things that I can't talk about until we've got a sort of final view into that roadmap. But I look forward to talking about that in the weeks to come.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and congratulations officially on your new role.
Thanks.
Very excited for you.
Me too.
So let's start with the question about access versus adoption. So when you say that we, people in the district have access, what does that mean? Does it mean there's technically a provider, or is there some meaning on affordability, choice?
Yeah, I want to make sure I'm super clear. Access comes in two parts: infrastructure and adoption. That was the stipulation I was trying to make. So if you were to kind of think of a sort of addition sentence, right? It takes infrastructure, but it also takes adoption. So infrastructure plus adoption equals access. And so I didn't say that we don't have an access problem. So we don't have an infrastructure problem. We've got fiber throughout the city. Okay. And so we have the ability to have households connect. It's just whether or not they find it relevant, right? We can't force access onto a household. We have to make sure that they understand the importance of having it.
But it's more than that, right? There's a cost, right? And then there's the reliability of the internet. So it is, if we say, Councilmember White has internet access, that may be technically true, but maybe the speed is not good enough for a household that may have multiple people working. Maybe I can't afford it. So how do we start to untangle that?
Yeah, so those are we've had some large, lengthy conversations in regards to sort of the roadblocks to access, right? The roadblocks to adoption. And I think that they sort of boil down to affordability and relevance. That relevance part can be resolved through training programs, increased training programs, making sure that we are thinking sort of throughout government about how to help users access services online also is a huge part of that. The second part is that affordability factor. The mayor put forward and launched Internet for All earlier this year. I heard some of the comments from the witnesses about the program. I would agree that I wasn't blown away by adoption, but I've had a lot of phone calls with a lot of different people that were contemplating utilizing it or not. What we found is, we found a lot of different things. There's a trust factor when it comes to dealing with private sector entities and asking them to be your utility. And I think we have a lot of work to do across the city to make sure that we regain that trust and or find alternative ways to allow for households to affordably access internet.
One of the things that I don't think was part of your answer was internet speeds. So do we feel confident that the people who have access to internet have access to internet that is at sufficient speed?
It's a very good question. I think the goal, I think generally we need to make sure that we're looking at. I think the best way to answer this is you saw that sort of national providers of internet increased their speeds of their lowest cost programs during the pandemic. So I would argue that the industry helped to answer that question.
Maybe.
Sorry, helped to answer it, meaning that they were not providing fast enough internet at the beginning.
Right,
They needed
but are
to
you
ramp
saying they
up.
are providing
Yeah.
fast enough internet now, or just that it's faster than before?
It's faster than before. So we know that there was obviously a problem before.
Right. So I guess the question, and it's a difficult question, so I'm not trying to pin you down. It's one we all have to figure out is, are the speeds fast enough for what people need? Because I think we have to be careful to not say, well, they're doing better, so everybody's good. We are trying to figure out,
I didn't say that. I wouldn't have said that.
I know.
Okay. I think a way to think about this is, I think even folks that had the fastest internet, right? They were paying for the fastest internet during COVID, during lunch hours, right? 12 to 2 o'clock, sort of citywide, and also when school ended. Or right around the time that school ended, you saw some increased usage, right? There was a lot of times at like 2 o'clock, you tried to get on a conference call or a virtual call from home, and there was a degraded service. So you were paying for the best internet, but you were like, actually a lot of people called me and they're like, why is this not working? I was like, well, that's your home internet. But the truth is that we're sort of facing a tragedy of the commons, right? Like we've got an issue where doesn't matter. What's the best way to, even the big internet service providers today that have robust networks, robust capacity, they tell, how do I say this in a nice way? They say that they're providing a certain speed. They cannot guarantee that they're going to provide that speed at every single minute when there's like a whole bunch of people on. I think we saw it when somebody was trying to watch, the world was trying to watch something on Netflix and nobody could get to Netflix. So there's like a limitation always to technology. And so I would urge us to, I think it's a good idea to set goals. I think it's a good idea, but it's also worth noting that setting absolutes are just kind of not possible in this with the current technology that we have today. So every single person in every single household cannot get the same exact speed at every single time of the day.
And that's correct. But I also want to make sure, and I think many people want to make sure on the other side of that, we're not saying, okay, we'll set kind of non-goals and then be happy with whatever we get. Because we don't know what, if anything, you might have heard my comments on the infrastructure bill. I'm eternally optimistic, but don't know exactly what it's going to mean for the District of Columbia. Same thing with respect to increased internet speeds from providers. If we don't have goals, then anything better than what we have right now is good. And so I guess my question is, in the work that you and your team are doing with respect to goals, how specific do you intend to be with regard to access, speed, and affordability?
Pretty specific. It's definitely kind of components of what the teams all talked about during the discussion. So we'll set some pretty specific benchmarks.
Wonderful.
And the problem is, I'm trying to make sure that we can do that in a way that we also have the funding to enable. So.
Okay. What's the timeline for setting those goals, and what do you anticipate will be the timeline for reaching the goals?
In the coming weeks, most definitely, we'll be setting those goals. The timeline for implementing, I think it's arguably and that's sort of, I think I mentioned it in my testimony, one of the challenges that I sort of impressed upon the whole group was that we need to come up with sustainable solutions. Because the truth is, we could set something today, we could invest in some type of solution today, but 5 years down the line, we're going to need to modernize it, and we're going to need to maintain it, and we're going to need to continue to operate it. And so this is not just sort of a one-time project that we're ever going to be done with. I would say that the goal, particularly as we see sort of what is coming through with federal funding, will be to kind of put some thoughtful timelines about sort of the next 2 to 3 years And then we kind of reassess as we go.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with technology, very different than many other areas. Those are always going to be sort of ever moving goals.
And I think we have to remember to fund things that way too, right? So that's the kind of,
yeah.
It's not something that we are used to doing in government.
That's right. You have mentioned, several people have mentioned Internet for All. Can you just sentence or two say what that program is for people who may be watching who don't know?
Yep. Mayor Bowser launched Internet for All earlier in the pandemic. We received federal dollars through our sort of education funding to cover the cost of internet for those that were relying on internet to learn from home. We put out a program that allowed for 12 months of free access to the lower cost internet service of our partners, RCN and Comcast. And trying to take out some of the barriers of accessing that service, we asked schools to identify the students that needed internet access. And based on that, we then reached out and connected them with Comcast or RCN to set up the service. Yeah.
Okay. And you all switched to a self-enrollment at some point, is that right?
We provided a code so that folks could call and sign up.
Perfect. There was some testimony, multiple testimonies about sort of, how we do outreach in this question of really adoption. I'm trying to remember the term everybody's been using over and over again, adoption. So, there was a question of, how do we do a better job of reaching people, making sure people know that these resources are available. As we look at doing more work with internet access, are there any lessons that we've learned in terms of making sure people know about the programs that that are available to them?
It's a good question. I think it's always sort of there's an evolving answer, right? I think
no perfect answer.
I think the truth is in today's world, there's just so many channels that people are getting information from, right? And it doesn't matter what you're trying to communicate, whether you're, a massive, I'm looking at sort of the Marriott Hotel across from the Wilson Building, a massive brand or a smaller local government. You have a number of options to get information to people. The truth is, people don't all, are not all interested in receiving that information. Let's say the positive way. People receive information in different ways, and so figuring out exactly what channels you need to get to and how you need to package it. That's an evolving. It's an evolving thing. And I think as government, we've come a long way very quickly in trying to change the way that we communicate. And I think I look forward to what's to come, because I think we've learned a lot during the pandemic about how to communicate, where to communicate, when to communicate. And now we just have to continue to get better.
There was some discussion about treating internet as a public utility, or similarly, but maybe not the exact same thing, more broadly expanding DCNet to make it available to households. Can you talk about those ideas, whether you see them as viable or good ideas?
Yeah, I think the first one is definitely above my pay grade. That's a conversation that a lot of very smart people have to have. I have my personal views, but that's not relevant here. So if you don't mind, I'll just skip to the second one. DCNet, I think I've talked about this with you, is that we are looking at, I think that with DCNet, which is, and just for our kind of viewers to make sure that they understand, that is 800 miles of fiber that DC government owns and operates in Washington, DC. We connect almost 650 buildings, and we also have a number of federal government agencies that we provide internet services to. We also provide internet services to a number of nonprofits that are DC focused. So not the American Red Cross, but Unity Health, for instance. So we have this network that has been built over the past 20 years that other jurisdictions are like very jealous of. And what I've been asking our teams and other smart thought partners in the private sector to think about, and public sector actually, are how do we leverage what we've got to contemplate whether or not it makes sense for us to provide residential service and or be that middle mile provider, so that actually to Commissioner Holmes's point, if we become that middle mile provider, is there space for small businesses in Washington, D.C. to be the provider of the last few feet? If we're providing sort of middle mile coverage at a government cost. So hopefully slightly reduced.
So, and I'm sorry if I missed this. So it is possible that at least for some households and businesses, DCNet could play a role in helping them access.
So can DCNet provide residential service? Does that even make sense? Is it even feasible? Second question, can we be a middle mile provider, provide a big internet pipe to allow small businesses to be that last few feet provider? Mm-hmm. So then we create this sort of new industry of internet service providers in Washington, D.C. that are utilizing our infrastructure to provide residential internet.
Okay. And are there jurisdictions that do that now?
Different scenarios. So Chattanooga in Georgia put together, and I'm actually I think Google helped them put together a pretty thoughtful residential program. Fort Collins, Colorado is an interesting example, but they already had a public utility. So they owned and operated their electric company. So they already had connections to every single residence. So easy to overlay at-home internet to that. We don't have that. So the long, I could go through like a few different examples. Long answer is a lot of people have tried a lot of things. I don't think anybody's gotten it 100%. I don't think anybody's solved for it perfectly. We can look to some good ideas, but I think we have an interesting opportunity, particularly with this federal injection of cash at the moment, to do something unique and a little bit more forward-leaning.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more? You mentioned at the beginning of your testimony, I think it was the beginning of your testimony, Tech Together DC. So what is this initiative and who's involved?
Well, I think, it's kind of speaks to the conversation that we're having here, right? These are meaty issues, a lot of different parts, a lot of different perspectives. And so Mayor Bowser made, I thought, a thoughtful decision in the middle of COVID to launch Tech Together DC. You can read more about it at techtogether.dc.gov, really to bring these different points of view, these different perspectives together, including a number of the panelists, some of the internet service providers, and some of the nonprofits that are helping refurbish technology, including and also provide training, folks like Bite Back, brought them all together to talk about some of these things and really kind of narrow in on what's the right approach for DC. What should our goals be, and where should we be focused, and how do we get more than just the government as a part of the solution? Because I don't think it's just us, right? If we tell a bunch of people to utilize an internet connection, I almost guarantee you that that's not going to happen, right? And instead, we need our community-based organizations arm in arm to make sure that we're able to do this effectively.
Okay. So are these Octo employees? Are they employees across the government, contractors? Who's involved in Tech Together DC?
So government, us, a number of different agencies, the libraries were involved, the aging and community living they both took a very big role. Human services took a big role. So a number of different government agencies, but also nonprofits
Mhm.
that I just mentioned. So Bite Back was a partner, for instance, 49 different pledge partners.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Universities took part, and for-profit entities like some of our Internet for All partners.
Okay. So do we have like full-time FTEs like working on tech together, or is it people who are, it overlaps with something else that they do, so they're part of this initiative as well?
Oh, in terms of sort of corralling this initiative, I think I would argue that we like re-envisioned Connect DC to help focus on this. So we have a 4-person staff that's focused on this.
Okay.
And the Federal City Council, Laura testified earlier today, was also a partner, a massively helpful partner.
The emergency broadband benefit program, and I noticed it's a federal program. Do you have awareness of this program?
Yes, yes, definitely have awareness. I think the best thing that I could say about that is, I think it's kind of like the STAY program, right? Like there's a timeline, there's not a timeline, there's a chunk of cash for the entire nation, and it's gonna run out at some point. And so it's a $50 per month program, and I'm just not quite sure if that's the thing to push people into. I think the infrastructure bill contemplates extending it, and that would be really exciting.
Okay. Well, that was my next.
Tell more people about it all the time.
That was my next question about, I didn't know if this funding was tied to sort of like, pandemic relief or, limited, but yeah. I want to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about the Citizen Broadband Radio Service. During the budget oversight, the Citizen Broadband Radio Service, or CBRS network, was proposed to provide wireless broadband to DC residents, and it's a band of spectrum that the FCC made available to support broadband availability expansion efforts in 2017. Has OCTO begun fleshing out how we might use that spectrum?
Yeah, I think I testified that we were conducting a feasibility study and about whether or not we could do it. What we found was a bummer, and that is that the speeds were not fast enough. I would argue that research didn't go for naught, because what it has done is it's made us think about different things that we can, like I kind of talked about before, different ways that we can utilize what we own today, the infrastructure that we own today, to think about what we should be doing next. And so we're sort of looking for the next great idea.
Every idea that we research doesn't pan out. One issue that came up in the last panel was public housing. Do we know, does OCTO know what percentage of public housing residents in DC have access to internet at a speed of, let's say, 100/20?
I don't know that exact number, but it's a really good question. We are working with the DC Housing Authority, and under new leadership with Brenda Donald, we're working even more collaboratively. The council and the mayor set aside some money in the budget to do some pilots there, and so we're pushing ahead with that. And so let me look into that. And in terms of like the full, like all public housing, I'm not quite sure. I don't have that information at the top of my head, I must admit.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask about the public housing Wi-Fi pilot program.
Yeah. So renewed momentum to make some progress there, thanks to the direction of Director Donald, and so hopefully we'll have a even better. We've done all the surveying. We know what we need to do, and we've set up the agreement so that we can work with the Housing Authority, which was a big step forward, and now we can start deploying. So we'll hopefully come back and tell you even more during our performance hearing.
Okay. And Commissioner Holmes mentioned DPR facilities, and specifically said that in, I think Deanwood, he said, the library has decently strong internet, but the adjacent or attached recreation center doesn't. Is this deliberate because we invest more in our libraries, or is this technology still needs to evolve, we need to make more investments? Is there a reason that should we expect that DPR facilities have weaker internet than say libraries?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Libraries and public schools get to utilize a federal E-rate program to pay for their internet and technology needs. And so basically it's like I think it's a 1-to-1 match. So they pay half as much for twice as much, and libraries and schools get to get reimbursed for federal E-rate. Rec centers don't. And so there might be a little bit of a difference. And I know that our schools are supposed to be all at 1 gig. So I don't know if I can say the same thing for all of our rec centers. I thought we worked on Deanwood. So as soon as Commissioner Holmes said that, I called up the team and I know that he'll get a call to make sure that we're seeing the speeds that we're expected to be seeing. I want to make sure that every rec center has the ability. I think Commissioner Holmes and a number of other community members have done some pretty neat things with esports. And so I want to just make sure that they have access. And I don't think I knew that there was still an issue at Deanwood.
Okay, well, thank you for looking into it. I'm sure he will appreciate it. There's a DDOT streetlight project that is going to update some streetlights to deploy wireless access points in wards 7 and 8. Are these access points anticipated to be strong enough to reach inside residential complexes?
No, never. We'll never have sort of public Wi-Fi that's sort of sitting out. Never. I can't say never. How can I say never?
Can't say never.
I can't say never. Let's figure it out. No, right now, the technology is not kind of in a place where that is possible without a device in the home. And so we've talked about that a little bit. I think that being said, the kind of the next iteration of what public Wi-Fi ought to look like. That's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Yeah. Okay. So specific to Councilmember Allen's Internet Equity Amendment Act, the legislation proposes a new digital equity division in OCTO. So how is digital equity structured right now within OCTO?
So I think that's what I know that is what Tech Together DC is contemplating, right? Okay. That is, we're addressing the digital divide. And in addressing the digital divide, we are bringing equity bringing about equity to a problem that is, that needs to be solved quickly.
Yeah. So is Tech Together contemplated to be a permanent entity or sort of a temporary initiative? So, we'll roll out some goals, but how do we carry that through and do the day-to-day work that'll be required?
And again, that's sort of the what I laid out for all pledge partners involved at the beginning of our conversations was let's figure out what our goals are going to be, but then let's figure out how do we make this sustainable. And so we've got a number of different ideas on the table, and that's what I'm hoping to talk about in the next few weeks.
The bill also mandates a survey of households in DC to find out how many households earning 50% of the area median income or below pay more than 0.5% of their household income for internet connection. Is Tech Together DC tracking anything like this?
And so that is part of the conversations that we had, right? Laying out those goals and then figuring out how we're going to measure them. And so that's what will be a part of the roadmap and the sort of the outcome of the Tech Together DC conversations.
And do you have at this point an idea of what the recommended minimum upload and download speeds will be?
I mean, yeah. I think the anything less than 120 is just not worth kind of talking about. So I know it will be in that range, if not more.
Okay. And is that where the FCC is? I don't know. Okay.
I mean, FCC. I think that's where I think that's just sort of an industry best standard.
Okay. Okay. And do the proposed reporting deadlines in the legislation as drafted, do those seem realistic to you? Legislation trying to have us, kind of set goals, make a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think always that's what we need to do, always setting goals, making a plan, and we're doing that with Tech Together DC. I think the thing that I would stress the council to think about is let's make sure that the 4 people that I mentioned and the teams supporting them are focused on getting these federal dollars. I think and not having any other sort of competing interests get in the way of that.
Yeah. Hopefully we won't have to figure this out, but we may have to figure out sort of when look, we're all hoping that the infrastructure bill that includes broadband will pass. There may come a point where we have to have a conversation about whether that's going to happen. Hopefully not, but we can't delay forever. So like if this window closes, we can't say, well, let's wait till next time it opens. So I do see some I do think it's right to understand what the federal government might do. But I also think that if we're going to see it, we're going to see it relatively soon. So prudent is the word I was trying to look for. I do think there's some prudence in seeing what the federal government does.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what the biggest barrier to high-speed internet access is in the district? I know there's been discussion about cost. There's been some discussion about whether people know about or take advantage of programs. And then, to some extent, and you're saying it's not a large extent, there's sort of a lack of, internet access. Do you know what are all those big barriers, or is like one of them more significant or prevalent than the others?
The conversations in Tech Together DC centered around relevance and affordability. Mm-hmm. So households, and I think we did that because those are the sort of kind of main areas that we see as a burden to overcome. And so, part of the conversation that we've had is, is a solve really at-home internet? Is residential internet what we're trying to solve for? Or do we need something that's a little bit more omnipresent, right? Wherever you go, you've got the ability to get online. So I think the relevance and affordability, those are the biggest burdens. I think, and one comes with a significant focus on training and making sure that folks understand the opportunities that can present themselves with the ability to get online. And I think the second is a conversation that it's hard to have without the understanding of sort of what the federal funds look like, but we need to do something to make it even more affordable.
I'm curious to see what the discussion on relevance will be, because I have to assume for people with disposable incomes, there's not a question of relevance. You have internet as a standard. And so my suspicion is that there'll be a big overlap between affordability and relevance, but it'll be much more an issue of affordability. Because
I thought so too. But then you see this like massive uptick of smartphone use. And as a result, people are on the internet. And so I'm not quite sure. I don't actually, I thought I was, sort of good government studies on situations like this in different utilities or different aspects of kind of what how a household decides to spend their money. I don't know if this stacks up the same way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you explored the idea of whether the DC government could, on a bulk purchase rate, purchase internet and provide it for a lower cost or subsidized cost to residents? Is that a possibility for getting stronger internet speeds to more households?
We do that today, but we just don't provide residential internet, right? So we pay for internet so as to provide redundant connections to all the different customers that I talked about earlier. And that's the uniqueness of that DCNet setup. The question about, there's so that's sort of one part of that question, but the second part of that question is then, we don't have connections to every residence. So making those actual connections is an infrastructure investment that's quite costly.
And I guess I'm talking more about private providers. So Comcast, Verizon, RCN, I may be missing some. Could the government for residential uses purchase at sort of a lower bulk rate internet packages?
Oh, I see. Like Internet for All.
Yes.
Like Internet for All.
Yes.
I think that, we do. That's what we do. Internet for All is us purchasing internet. So we're paying for internet to provide it for free to anyone that signs up.
Okay. So I guess I'm wondering if we could do that on a universal basis, something available to all residents, maybe subsidized at different rates depending on income. Could that possibly be more cost efficient for residents? So if DC government pays the provider and residents pay DC government, we theoretically could get a much better deal than all these individual households.
What's the best? You would think so, but I don't. We're paying market rate.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to explore that idea a little bit more. So I may have questions for you later after this hearing on this. Are there, I guess just to wrap up, that was one, what I just asked is one idea I had. Are there other ideas that maybe we need to explore that's what you're doing, right? So, but are there options that you are exploring that haven't come up in the hearing today?
There's a lot of different things that we're looking at and doing assessments of all the different cities and different countries that are doing different things, and the sort of the promise of 5G, exploring what we can and cannot do there. I think we kind of covered it in terms of like what people care about. Like we're looking at what the right solution might be for us.
Well, I want to thank you for being part of this discussion. I think it's a very helpful and fruitful discussion. I think all of us residents, committee, Octo, and the administration are all really focused on the same thing, and just figuring out, what's the best path or paths there. So this discussion has been really helpful for us. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think is important for the record?
No, I just read an exciting time, right, to be in government and thinking about sort of a very big challenge that we really can make some real inroads on right now. So very excited about that. And I recognize that everybody would like us all to move faster. And I understand the urgency.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being part of this hearing and part of this conversation. Do want to thank you and your team for the work you all are doing. As we close out the hearing, I also want to thank our public witnesses and mention that anyone who wishes to submit additional testimony, written testimony is encouraged and will be made part of the official record. And so if you are interested in submitting testimony, you can send it via email to the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities at facilities@dccouncil.us. The record for this hearing will close at the close of business on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. The business before this committee is concluded, or the hearing for this committee is concluded. The time is now 1:42 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.